In the small, cozy town of Elmridge, an old Victorian house sat nestled among sprawling oaks, its windows aglow with the warm light of a late summer evening. Inside, Sarah, a young woman with a soft spot for antiques, had just moved in, eager to start anew. She spent the day unpacking, arranging her grandmother's quilt on the back of the sofa, and setting up pictures of happy family gatherings on the mantelpiece. As dusk fell, she lit a few candles to fill the space with a soft, comforting glow, and the faint scent of vanilla wafted through the rooms. Sarah decided to unwind with a book in the living room, her back to the large windows that looked out into the darkening woods. The evening was quiet. The only sounds the gentle crackle of the record player and the occasional hoot of an owl. As she read, however, a subtle change began to unsettle the air around her. The temperature seemed to drop, causing her to pull the quilt tighter around her shoulders. From the corner of her eye, Sarah thought she saw shadows flit across the walls, shapes that were too quick to be merely the flicker of candlelight. She shook her head, attributing the unease to the solitude and the unfamiliar creaks and groans of an old house settling into night. But as the hours ticked by, the atmosphere thickened, and the shadows grew more pronounced, more deliberate in their movements. Trying to ignore the mounting fear, Sarah turned up the volume on the record player, but the cheerful tunes now seemed distorted, notes bending in unsettling ways. Then, the lights flickered. A gust of wind howled against the windows, and Sarah jumped as one of the candles snuffed out on its own, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Heart racing, she got up to relight the candle, telling herself it was just the wind. But as she approached the window, she noticed that the trees outside were still. There was no wind. Her breath caught in her throat as a chill ran down her spine. She rushed to check the locks on the doors and windows, reassuring herself that it was all in her head. Finally, after double-checking each lock, Sarah felt her nerves settle. She returned to her quilt and book, forcing a laugh at her own skittishness. The house was secure, and nothing was amiss. Yet, just as she began to relax, her eyes fell upon the family pictures on the mantelpiece. They were no longer images of her relatives. Each frame displayed a different, unfamiliar face, all staring directly at her with silent, accusing eyes. Frantically, she turned to the back of the nearest photo, where her mother had written the names and dates. The writing was gone, replaced by a single cold message scrawled in a shaky hand. "You don't belong here." Panic surged as Sarah backed away from the mantelpiece. The record player, unnoticed until now, had stopped, replaced by a low, almost inaudible whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The house, her sanctuary, had turned against her, morphing into a cage of eyes and whispers. Sarah bolted for the door, heart pounding as she fumbled with the lock. It wouldn't turn. Desperate, she picked up the phone to call for help. But the line was dead. As she turned from the useless phone, she faced the living room window and saw, to her horror, her own face peering in at her. But the expression was twisted, malevolent, a dark mirror of herself. The realization hit her like a wave of cold water. She wasn't alone. Whatever resided in this house had been there long before she arrived, waiting. And as the face outside the window smiled, a grotesque, knowing grin, Sarah understood that the house would never let her leave. Not truly. Even if she managed to escape, part of her would always remain, trapped in the reflection of the glass, in the corners of the rooms, in the echo of whispers that would never cease. As the night pressed on, the whispering grew louder, and Sarah sank to the floor, covering her ears. The house had become her prison, and the nightmare she lived now was only just beginning.